Pay attention to Maribel Ramos, 36 years old, walking calmly through her apartment building's manager office at 8:20 in the evening on May 2nd, 2013. She is paying her rent, a routine errand. She has less than a few hours left to live. Nobody on that security camera footage could have seen what was coming. Not the property manager, not the neighbors. And certainly not Maribel herself, a decorated Army veteran who had survived combat in the Iraqi desert. Walking back to her apartment to meet the one threat she never saw coming. Her car would still be parked outside the next morning, her purse still sitting exactly where she left it. But Maribel would be gone. And the man who reported her missing, who posted tearful messages online calling her his best friend, his only family, the woman he would die for, was the man who had already buried her in a California canyon. This is the story of how a military hero survived everything a war could throw at her, only to be destroyed by the obsession of a man living 10 feet down the hallway. Let us go back to Orange County, California, May of 2013. Life for Maribel was genuinely good. She had a boyfriend. She was finishing up her degree at California State University, Fullerton. Graduation was close enough to taste. She had fought too hard for too long to let anything derail her now. 8 years in the United States Army. A tour in Iraq. She had re-enlisted after her first tour because that was the kind of person she was. The kind who sees something through. The kind who does not quit. When she finally left the Army in 2009, she came home carrying the invisible weight that so many veterans carry. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Not something she advertised. She dealt with it the way she dealt with everything else. Head down, forward momentum. She enrolled at Fullerton, got herself a dog, rented a 2-bedroom apartment on Rose Avenue in the city of Orange. And she needed a roommate to split the costs. That is where Kwang Choi Joy entered the picture. Casey, as he was known, was a chemist. Quiet, introverted. He had relocated from Tennessee to California for work and had very few connections in the area. When Maribel crossed paths with him, she did what she always did. She was decent. She included him. Dinners, parties, outings, gatherings with friends. She treated him like he belonged, like he mattered. That generosity, that warmth, it was exactly the kind of person Maribel was. But here's the problem with extending that kind of warmth to the wrong person. Sometimes they mistake it for something else entirely. Casey Joy was 54 years old, almost 2 decades older than Maribel. And somewhere in the year they spent living together, somewhere between the dinners and the late nights and the easy friendship, Casey had convinced himself that what he felt for Maribel was something she might eventually feel in return. That is not an observation. That is a documented fact, confirmed later by people who knew him, confirmed by his own behavior, and confirmed in the most damning way possible by something he once did that tells you everything you need to know about how far gone he already was. When Maribel had gently told him he was too old for her, Casey did not process that and move on. He did not reassess the situation, pack his feelings away, and accept the reality. Instead, he went out and spent $12,000 on plastic surgery. $12,000 to try to look younger. For a woman who had already told him she was not interested. That tells you the distance between Casey's world and reality. By the spring of 2013, the situation had shifted again. Casey had lost his job. With no income, he could not cover his half of the rent. Maribel, practical and clear-eyed, told him he needed to move out. No cruelty in it. Just the obvious response to someone who cannot pay their share. But for Casey, being asked to leave was not a logistical inconvenience. It was a catastrophe. Leaving that apartment meant leaving proximity to Maribel. And that was something he was not prepared to do. Here is a detail that quietly shakes you when you understand it in full context. Less than 2 weeks before she disappeared, Maribel had called 911, not because of an emergency, because she wanted something on the record. She had been frightened enough to call the police. And the call, when you hear it, is chilling precisely because she is so composed.
Is there a what? Is this conversation recording? Yes, every conversation is recorded. I'm just calling so that you guys know that if something happened, I did it because I was trying to defend myself. All I'm trying to say is that I'm warning. Honestly, I will fight for my life, and I swear I will kill him. His full name is Kwang Choi. What I understand is Kwang Choi.
She said with her own voice, in plain English, on a recorded line, that she was afraid she might have to fight for her life against the man living in her apartment. She was not panicking. She was being a veteran. She was protecting herself the way a soldier protects herself. She was creating documentation. She survived a war. She knew how to prepare. But she also went home that night and the next morning, and she kept living in that apartment with Casey because she was not the kind of woman who ran from things. That was both her greatest strength and the reason she never made it to graduation. On May 2nd, 2013, she is seen on the apartment building's security camera at 8:20 in the evening. She pays the rent at the manager's office. She appears calm, unhurried. From how she is dressed, it does not look like she had any plans for the rest of the night. She was likely heading back upstairs. She never made it to morning. The next day, May 3rd, Maribel's sister received a text from Casey. Maribel had not come home the night before. He had already called the police himself to report her missing, presenting himself as the worried roommate, the protective friend, the man who cared more about her than anyone. He explained he had seen her that morning before leaving for work, come home in the evening, and found the apartment empty. Police began their work. Maribel's car was parked at the apartment. Her phone was gone, her keys were gone, but her purse was inside. Her toothbrush was still there. That combination does not add up to someone who chose to leave. You take your purse. You take your toothbrush if you are going somewhere. You do not leave behind the things that mean you intend to return. When Maribel missed her softball game that night, that was the moment her family and friends knew something was deeply wrong. She never missed that game. Never. It was not something she did. And she was beloved, Maribel, popular, warm, the kind of person other people organize their lives around. Within hours, her community was out in force, passing flyers, knocking on doors, calling anyone and everyone. The streets around the apartment were searched. Nearby stores were checked for CCTV footage. Nobody could find a trace of her. There was one piece of evidence, that security camera footage from the apartment manager's office. 8:20 p.m., May 2nd.
This is Maribel Ramos' neighborhood where she was last seen sometime Thursday night between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. It's one of the details listed on this flyer that family and friends are passing out as we speak, hoping that someone saw something.
Police began interviewing everyone in Maribel's life. Her boyfriend, Paul Lopez, was first. He was cooperative. He confirmed they were dating, but acknowledged things were not exactly exclusive on either side of the equation. Maribel, it turned out, had a Cinco de Mayo date planned for the 5th with a military photographer she had met online. She had a life, a full one, reaching out in multiple directions at once. She was not hiding. She was not running from anything. She was building something. All the men in Maribel's life were interviewed. All of them had solid alibis. Every direction the investigation pointed, it eventually swung back around to one address on Rose Avenue. One person. The roommate who had reported her missing, the man with scratches on his arms he could not convincingly explain, the man who had been sitting outside his own house in his car with binoculars on the night police were trying to find him. When detectives asked Casey about the scratches, he laughed awkwardly and produced a story about a dog jumping into a pond and getting tangled in fishing lines and him wading in to rescue the animal. The detectives let him talk. The story was elaborate, specific, full of detail, and it had not happened. There was no dog. There were no fishing lines. The story about the binoculars was, if anything, stranger. Casey explained that on the night he could not be reached, he had been sitting in his car watching his front door because he wanted to see if the real perpetrator came back to the scene. His own words. He was conducting surveillance on his own apartment because he suspected a criminal might return.
But police are saying her disappearance is considered suspicious.
This is Maribel Ramos' neighborhood where she was last seen sometime Thursday night between 7:30 and 8:30 p.m. It's one of the details listed on this flyer that family and friends are passing out as we speak, hoping that someone saw something.
Her binoculars were bizarre. The 911 call Maribel had made was deeply alarming in retrospect, but none of it was evidence of a crime. They could not hold him. They could not charge him. And so they did what investigators do in that situation. They let him go and they watched. Meanwhile, because nothing about this case was ever straightforward, Casey decided to handle his grief by posting on Yelp. On May 8th, 5 days after Maribel was reported missing, a friend of hers named Emily had posted on the Yelp thread connected to their apartment building the kind of long-shot public plea that desperate people make when they just want more eyes on a situation. A few people responded with prayers and support. A user named Enrique asked whether police had spoken to the roommate yet. Emily confirmed yes, he had cooperated completely, provided DNA samples, even consented to photographs of his body to document the absence of defensive wounds, and handed over his cell phone. Then Casey himself appeared in the thread. Number 3. His profile picture was of himself and Maribel together. He typed out a message introducing himself as her roommate, her best friend, her only family. He talked about how much
voluntarily they want a DNA sample that took a picture of my body. They will search the house without a search warrant. I'll give them a permission to do it. Go ahead, go forward. She's my only family I have. She's my best friend, and I have to come back. That's all.
Everyone in his contact list, he called it a major inconvenience. But he insisted none of that mattered. All that mattered was Maribel. A user named Grant pointed out something almost immediately. Something quiet and precise and impossible to ignore once you saw it. Casey had written about Maribel in the past tense. We had so much fun together. She always knew. Not we have, not she knows. Past tense. The grammar of someone who has already processed a loss that the rest of the world has not yet been told about. Another user, Tiffany, pushed back on Grant, reminding everyone to let police do their jobs, suggesting Casey might simply be using past tense because he feared the worst. Reasonable point. People do that. They shift into past tense when they are bracing for bad news. But then Casey kept posting. He posted again the next day and the day after. He wrote about seeing Maribel at a candlelight vigil, but sitting far away because a family member had made a threatening remark to him and because he knew police were treating him as a suspect. He acknowledged the scrutiny. He pushed back against it. And then, in a message that made users across the thread stop cold, he mentioned the life insurance. He wrote that Maribel was his only family, his only beneficiary for $250,000 in life insurance, paid upon death. He wrote that she was the sole beneficiary of his bank account as well. He wrote that she knew this, and then he added a sad face. The thread erupted. A user named Daniel stepped in carefully, not accusing Casey, but pointing out, with measured words, that posting life insurance details and beneficiary information about a missing woman on a public internet forum was not the wisest move. That to uninvolved third parties, it created the appearance of motive. That Casey should be more careful about what he shared and where. Casey responded that he could not think straight. Back in the physical world, detectives shadowing Casey noticed he had been using the public library computers regularly, presumably because police had seized his phone and Maribel's laptop was also in their possession. An undercover officer followed him in one day and positioned themselves to see over his shoulder. What they saw was Casey searching an online mapping tool and zooming in on a specific patch of remote land beside a road in the California hills. A quiet stretch. No buildings, nothing remarkable. Nothing. That is, unless you knew what had been buried there. Police obtained a warrant to monitor Casey's library computer sessions in real time. Officers in a van parked outside watched a live feed of every keystroke, every search, every click. They watched him log into Yahoo Mail. They watched him apply for jobs. And then they watched him pull up the map again and zoom in, slowly and deliberately, on that same patch of earth in Santiago Canyon. They drove out there. Number 4. The smell reached them before they reached the site. Maribel Ramos was found in a shallow grave in Santiago Canyon approximately 2 weeks after she was last seen on that security camera paying rent. An Army veteran, a student 3 weeks from graduation, a daughter, a sister, a friend. Casey Joy was brought in. He came voluntarily. He sat across from detectives and continued to maintain that he had nothing to hide. An officer told him quietly that they believed he had the answers in his heart and that he should share them. Casey did not respond. He was arrested shortly after. When officers took him into custody, they found him wearing Maribel's military dog tags around his neck. He pleaded not guilty. His trial began in 2014. The prosecution faced a genuinely difficult road. Maribel's cause of death could not be definitively determined due to the level of decomposition when her body was found. There was no forensic evidence directly linking Casey to the killing. No DNA, no fingerprints, no blood. The apartment had been searched repeatedly. Nothing. His phone, his computer, her laptop, nothing. Circumstantial. Entirely and completely circumstantial. But then there was the library computer. Prosecutors presented the evidence of Casey's internet searches at the public library. Specifically, his repeated deliberate zooming in on the exact geographic location where Maribel's body had been buried. The same location, the same tree, the same stretch of road in Santiago Canyon, investigated in real time by law enforcement officers watching his screen from a van outside. Explain that. Casey tried. He offered the theory that someone, the real killer, had remotely hacked into the library computer while he was using it and had conducted those searches from a distance to frame him. A remote hacker had somehow accessed his specific session at that specific moment and had zoomed in on the burial site, all while Casey's hands were on the keyboard and an undercover officer was standing behind him. The real killer had chosen that exact computer at that exact time, knowing the police were watching Casey in order to ensure he would be caught. The jury heard that argument and found Casey guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. In the courtroom that day, as the sentence was delivered, Maribel's family sat with tears they were fighting to hold back. They had come for justice and they had received it. It had taken more than a year. It had required them to sit through a trial in which the man who killed their daughter and sister maintained throughout that he was innocent, that he was being framed, that he loved Maribel more than anyone in the world. They had to hear him say he would give his life for her while being the reason her life was gone. Casey addressed the court before sentencing. He spoke about how much he had thought about Maribel. He mentioned that he had been in jail for approximately 440 days and that he thought about the case almost every day. He said he could not apologize for something he had not done. He sent dozens of letters to the judge declaring his innocence. He wrote to a local news station saying the same. He said, in a line that carries its own particular weight, "Maybe someday the truth will come out. Maybe I will just die inside prison." His request for a new trial was denied. There is a detail about the Yelp thread worth returning to. The user named Grant, the one who had spotted the past tense in Casey's first post, the one who had flagged it as suspicious and been told to stop speculating and let the police work, came back to the thread after the arrest. He wrote that he had solved the case days earlier on that very discussion board and had been criticized for it. He offered a brief tribute to Maribel and then went quiet. He was not wrong. Number 5. Here's what the Yelp thread reveals about the way certain minds operate under pressure. Casey was intelligent enough to appear cooperative. He gave police access to the apartment. He submitted to DNA testing. He allowed photographs of his body. He handed over his phone. Every gesture said, "Look how transparent I am. Look how willing I am to help. Look how much I care." He positioned himself as the grieving best friend, the loyal roommate, the devoted, almost family member who was suffering right alongside everyone else. But he could not control the instinct to keep returning to the subject. He could not stop posting. He could not stop inserting himself into the conversation, making himself visible, making himself heard. And in doing so, he handed strangers on the internet enough thread to start pulling. The past tense, the life insurance, the beneficiary details, the profile picture of the two of them together, the vigil attended from a distance. Every post added texture to a portrait that was becoming increasingly impossible to ignore. And then the library. The map. That was not a mistake made by someone who was simply overwhelmed and not thinking straight. That was a man who could not stop circling the thing he had done, who kept returning to it digitally the way people sometimes return physically to a site they cannot let go of. Investigators call it returning to the scene. Casey did it through a search engine. He zoomed in on that stretch of road in Santiago Canyon and in doing so pointed every law enforcement officer watching his screen directly to the woman he had killed. Maribel Ramos had survived the United States Army. She had survived combat deployment. She had survived re-enlisting and going back for more. She had survived post-traumatic stress disorder. She had come home and built something, carefully and patiently, from the ground up, a degree, a future, a softball team, a community of people who loved her. She had 4 miles between herself and graduation. That is all, 4 miles in a few weeks. She had even tried to protect herself. She had called 911. She had put her fear on the record in her own voice. She had named him. She had done everything right. And she went home anyway because she was not the kind of person who ran, and because she could not have known that evening when she paid her rent at 8:20 p.m., casual and unhurried, that the clock was already running out. The case became known not just for the crime itself, but for what the Yelp thread revealed about the gap between what people project and what they carry inside. Casey Joy wrote repeatedly that he would give his life for Maribel, that she was his only family, that he missed her every second he was awake. He wrote all of that while knowing exactly where she was, while knowing what he had done, while wearing her dog tags. That is not grief. That is performance. And the performance was precisely what gave him away. Not the lack of forensic evidence, not the absence of witnesses, not even the 911 call. It was the need to be seen grieving, the need to be visible, the need to make sure everyone understood how much Casey Joy cared about Maribel Ramos, even after he had buried her in the canyon. Kwang Choi Joy is currently serving a sentence of 15 years to life for the second-degree murder of Maribel Ramos. He has maintained his innocence throughout and reportedly continues to do so. The computer search that led police to her body remains the central evidence of the case, a single digital thread that connected a man sitting at a library computer to a shallow grave in the California hills. Maribel's family described Joy in court as an evil man and a coward who should never be forgiven. The judge sentenced him accordingly. For anyone who follows true crime, this case tends to linger, not because the crime itself is uniquely complex, but because of how ordinary the beginning of it looks. A woman renting an apartment, getting a roommate, being kind to someone who was lonely, doing what decent people do, and the terrible quiet machinery that can set in motion when the person on the other side of that kindness mistakes it for something else. When proximity becomes obsession, when obsession becomes entitlement, when entitlement, denied, becomes something unspeakable. Maribel Ramos served her country. She came home, she worked towards something better. She was 36 years old with the rest of her life still ahead of her. She deserved to graduate. She deserved that sunny life she had been working towards since she was a girl in Santa Ana. She deserved every single thing she had been denied on a Thursday night in May in an apartment building at the hands of a man who called her his best friend and his only family. Remember Maribel Ramos,